The Iowa Hawkeyes are starting to adjust to the transfer portal and adding more key pieces. Will it be enough for Iowa to make another run towards the top of the Big Ten this year? And who's the freshman to watch out for?
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the Portal Podcast, where you get your daily transfer portal, recruiting, and NIL information. I am your host, Brian Smith. Thank you for coming in today. To check it out, we're going to be talking all things Iowa Hawkeyes. The Hawkeyes have a very interesting trend going on with the portal, and we're going to get into that here in a minute with Trent Condon. But first, today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Amazon Fire TV Stick. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console is needed. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. Let's talk about the Hawkeyes. And Trent, we got some portal. I have the surprise that I've been waiting for, and that's Iowa being a little more aggressive. I'm shocked by it, but happily so. Who did they lose? How's that going to impact their win total this year? Going to talk about impact transfers and possibly some freshmen that Iowa fans, Big Ten fans should know about. So right out of the gate, man, were you surprised that Iowa was at least a little bit more aggressive in the transfer? I'm not saying they're going Ole Miss or anything, but
Right.
Are you surprised at all?
I'm not really surprised, just because I know a lot of people, the latest is the greatest. That's kind of where our memories go. And you look back to last portal season, and they didn't do a whole lot. Well, there was a reason for that. They didn't have a ton of scholarships. And the year previous, they went out there and they were incredibly aggressive. That was the year that they brought in Cade McNamara, and they brought in Eric All, and they went out there and brought in 12 different transfer portal candidates that season. So it was something different 2 years ago. Then they kind of took a step back last year. And I don't think it was because anything changed in order of plugging holes. They just thought that they were in good shape at a lot of different positions, and that they had so much veteran experience coming back that they didn't need to plug the holes that they did the year previous. This year is different because those guys that came back for the bonus season, you look at the guys like Jay Higgins that came back for his a bonus COVID year, a guy like Sebastian Castro. That's mostly what they use kind of their portal money on, was bringing those guys back for their fifth and at times even their sixth year last season. So I wasn't surprised at all. And it's good because Kirk Ferentz, I know there's a lot of people that look at him and they see this old guy on the sidelines, the longest tenured coach in college football, and think that there's no adaptability. Now, it's not fast. That's not to do it. But he has adapted and he has made the change. So maybe not as quick as people want, but we've seen Kirk Ferentz. He is willing to evolve. And that's the reason that he's been around for 26 years.
Mark Granowski comes in at quarterback, Sam Phillips at receiver. They had some guys walk out the door, but, they did pretty well overall. Like, adding offensive pieces has been obviously Iowa's concern. Which guys from the spring window make the biggest impact? And if you want to talk a little bit about the winter window as well, fire away.
Yeah, Mark Granowski, the conversation starts right there. This is a guy that very quickly they identified in the portal. There were people here talking about him even before he entered the portal. And, Mark Granowski, very well, if he was healthy, would have been, fifth, sixth, seventh round draft pick. A lot of people believe that coming off his final season there at South Dakota State. But he also had to have that shoulder cleaned up. He was back throwing at the end of spring practice. And that was a great thing to see, because a lot of the initial reports that he wasn't going to be back throwing until June or July, and seeing him out there here in late April already doing that was a good thing to see. But it starts with Granowski. And the thing that I love about him, you watch the film and you can definitely see this as well, better than I can, Brian, but you see a guy that can make throws, but the physicality that he plays with, the toughness, watching him out there in single degree temperatures at South Dakota State in a playoff game, and those offensive linemen are out there with no sleeves, and he goes out there with no sleeves. It's not the leadership qualities that we had in the previous quarterback with Cade McNamara, which felt like a lot of false bravado, right? He was there, he was tough, he was arrogant, but it didn't seem absolutely true. You go back to Spencer Petras, he had the leadership qualities. The problem, he didn't have the talent qualities to go along with it. Now I think Iowa quarterback, for the first time in 6 years, has the full package. A guy that can lead, a guy that people want to follow, and it's not false. And secondly, a guy that can make plays, going to put his nose down. Mark Granowski is a difference maker, and I think it starts there.
Well, that certainly helps. And you brought up something about O linemen a second ago. So I'll just go to one of Iowa's traditional strengths. You and I talked before the show. Bryce George is coming in. Offensive lineman, where he plays is still to be determined. He comes over from Ferris State. Why don't you give your take on Bryce George?
So you look at what they have coming back on offensive line. They got 2 All-American candidates up front, one at center and another guy in Jones that very well would have been probably a late round selection, an athletic freak at the center position. You've seen him grow. At right tackle, Jennings Dunker. But he is just a right tackle. He's not a guy that you can flip-flop. He said before he's not comfortable on the left side. They're going to leave him there. You got an All-American at right tackle. Yeah, you'd love to be at left, but you got an All-American there. You're going to leave him over there. Cade Peeper's another guy that they're excited about at the guard position. And there's a bunch of other guys that have some experience. But the question mark was left tackle coming into the spring. There were 2 guys vying for the job. And the younger of the 2, Trevor Lauk, the guy with a ton of upside. For people in the recruiting world, you'll remember Trevor Lauk from a couple of years ago. He was one of those upper Midwest stars, right? A guy from Indianapolis that everybody was after. The Notre Dames, the Ohio States, and Michigans all had interest. And then it was the Illinois, the Wisconsins, the Iowas, and Nebraskas all after him. And he chose the Hawkeyes. Iowa doesn't win a ton of those recruiting battles. He doesn't have experience, but he's certainly a talented kid. And that has showed up right away when he showed up on campus. If Bryce George cannot play left tackle, then it's going to be Trevor Lauk. But I think their hope is that he will be able to do that. Bryce George, at minimum, can do it. The other component, though, is also depth of tackle, because outside of Jennings Dunker, outside of Lauk, they don't really have many tackles on the roster. And you've seen this, Brian. I think a lot of times at offensive line, those guys transitioning up, maybe they're not ready to be a starter and play 650 snaps a year, but they can be a backup or reserve role and maybe kick inside. I think they're just going to have to figure that out with Bryce George.
Well, offensive line is always their bread and butter. Do they have a running back, or is it going to be by committee? Like, what's the situation at tailback?
So running back's an interesting one because, of course, Caleb Johnson last year, he wasn't even the starter coming in. He was suspended for the first half of the first game for some offseason. It was a little late to a couple meetings during the summertime. So he didn't even get out there until the second half when we saw the All-American season that he was able to put together. But coming into the year, there were a lot of people that believed, and in fact, he was the starter in that first game, that Kamari Moulton, a kid from down in your neck of the woods, down in Florida, that Kamari Moulton was going to be the guy. I think you saw from him last year. He had a couple of big plays against Maryland, had a bunch of big plays, but it wasn't the consistency that you're wanting. It wasn't the ability that you saw Caleb Johnson reading in the zone scheme where those cuts were. You see the talent, and Kamari Moulton certainly has the talent, but as the year went on, even as Caleb Johnson was taking over, you saw the Moulton is waiting. So you start there. Another Florida kid, Jazzion Patterson, he'll be the backup. They got a couple of young kids they're excited about. Brevin Dahl from ADM. He sat out this spring as he was dealing with a hamstring injury. He's got speed to burn, Xavier Williams. But the newest name is one that I got to get your thoughts on, Brian, because another Florida kid. What's it with Iowa and these Florida running backs lately? Well, Liddell Betts, the former running back coach, he coached in high school, so that's probably where it comes from. But Nathan McNeil, now you look at the recruiting services, nobody wanted Nathan McNeil, and all of a sudden this kid shows up early, should be going to prom right now. Instead, he's going through spring football, and this dude, one of our the guy that runs the rival site here in Iowa, Hawkeye Beacon, he was described as lightning in a bottle, Nathan McNeil, but nobody wanted him. And here he shows up in Iowa, and he's already making heads turn as a true freshman.
Wiregrass Ranch is a high school just outside of Tampa. It's a really nice area, very popular school. It's hard to get your kid even in there. And they've had some players. Ironically, the starting quarterback at Iowa State also went to that high school. The irony all over the place. But yeah, that's how I know the program, because I used to go see him and some other kids they had. There's a receiver at Ohio State from that school. So it's got some players, but it's not top of the board. I used to live in Tampa. It's not one of the 5 or 6 programs. If you're a head coach or whatever, or somebody, a recruiting coordinator, you're sending your guys out, that isn't the first stop in Tampa by any means. But they've always got a couple of guys. So to that point, where he ends up this year will probably come down to some of the things that Kirk always likes: ball security, pass protection, consistency. Does he play? I got to see it. But another Florida kid that's under the radar making it at Iowa would not surprise me in the least. Not at all. Next up, when you look at the portal, you lost some guys too. Did anybody leave Iowa that you're like, this is a little rough? What are we going to do about it?
Well, there's two that jump to mind. I think the easiest one is Brendan Sullivan. Starter last year for a few games. He brought some juice. Finally saw a guy that could run around. First time in a long time we've seen a quarterback that could move a little bit, and that excited the Hawkeye fan base. You also saw his limitations as a passer. He is not a guy that you can, I think, trust over the course of a 12-game season that's going to be able to deliver throwing the football. But he's an exciting player. And to have a guy like that, if he was willing to stay in a backup role behind Granowski, I mean, now you're cooking. Mark Granowski and him, you don't have to change much of what you're doing offensively. That is one. The other one, though, I was a little bit disappointed was Joey Van Wetzinga. Now, very young. In fact, he didn't even really get here on campus. He was an early enrollee, but because of the scholarship crunch, the roster crunch now with 105, and we'll actually see how that ultimately plays out. But Iowa was at the forefront, letting the walk-ons know, letting the guys deeper down, hey, we're not going to have a spot for you in August, trying to help them find holes. And of course, Iowa trying to do things right might end up biting them in the butt. But his older brother was a walk-on fullback. Well, they wanted to play together. They wanted to play together for his final season of eligibility. So Joey went into the portal. His brother ended up at a MAC school at Central Michigan. He went there. He's a developmental piece. He was down the line, 2-3 years down the line, but I think he was going to be a big piece, either defensive tackle or offensive line at the guard position or center that they were really counting on. So I think that one kind of big picture is very impactful. And then one final name to pass along to you, and that was Khalil Tate. Khalil Tate is a guy that another big recruit for Iowa. Look at some of the teams that they beat out, and it just never clicked. I don't know what the reason was, why it never happened for him. He's still looking for a home, but him, John Nestor, a couple of defensive backs that they were counting on, and it just never completely clicked for both of those guys.
When we come back, we're going to talk more with Trent about the portal, win total, and some more recruiting. That is next here on this crossover with Locked On Hawkeyes and the Portal Podcast. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. FanDuel makes betting very easy. All you have to do is pick your favorite team. Maybe it's a game that you really like, and you can also dive into player props. Personally, I was a three-point guy when I was growing up, so players, whether they're going to hit so many threes or how many points they're going to score, in large part due to the three-point line, is something I like. But you can also do steals, assists, rebounds, whatever suits your fancy. Plus, even if the game is tipped off, you can still live bet, and you can also do prop bets as well. Don't miss out. Head over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, Trent, next up, would you say that the corner, this is something that I'm always fascinated with Iowa, the corner room, did they improve it? Is there concern? Is there anybody coming up as a recruit? However you want to shape it, because for those that don't know, I don't know if it's still true, but when Saban was at Bama with it's ridiculous how many DBs he had. Mm-hmm. Iowa was either right at or above how many guys made it to the NFL. Mm-hmm. That's insane. So I'm always curious about Iowa's corner room.
You look back at last season and you look at the step back that they had defensively, and you point to different things. But you look, Jay Higgins was back, and Castro was back, and the defensive line for the most part was back. And you go on and on and on. The one thing that they really struggled was at the cornerback spot. And we're just not used to that in Iowa City because of Phil Parker, what he does, the defensive coordinator. He began his career as a defensive back coach. Iowa every single year is so well-schooled, and it wasn't last year. You go back to their game against Troy, as Troy was hanging around in Iowa City, and it was giving up big plays. It is so un-Iowa-like what we saw a season ago, and there was some blame at the safeties, but there was a lot of the blame at cornerback. Now, one of the guys that returns sounds like he made the leap, and you go back through the last 25 years of Iowa football, and you look at the guys that, looked really bad early in their career. I think of Bradley Fletcher. I think of guys like Riley Moss. Both those guys now have put together long NFL careers. Bradley Fletcher had a decade. Riley Moss is going into year number 4. But you looked early in their career, they were terrible. And by the end, they were at elite level. I think TJ Hall is going to do that. I think he's going to make the leap. He made a couple of just incredible plays. Sometimes it just takes longer, right? That cornerback spot, you got to build up a lot of scar tissue, and he's got plenty of it, but it feels like he's the guy that's going to make the leap. On the other side, Deshaun Lee's played a lot the last couple of years, started a number of games. I don't think it's quite there, and that's why they were looking in the portal for cornerback, and they got Shaheed Barrows out of South Dakota. The great thing is South Dakota and Iowa, their scheme defensively is very similar. So this is not going to be you're learning something completely different going in right away, because he's not going to show up for another until June, basically camp starts. So he's finishing things up, his studies in South Dakota. He's not going to be a guy that obviously went through spring practice, but if Barrows can pick things up, I think he's going to be a guy probably starting on the other side. And then you look at the depth of that position, and Iowa, it does feel like they're building up that position. You told us about a Rashad Godfrey, kid out of Florida, that redshirted this past season. There's been a lot of buzz about him. A couple other guys on the young group at cornerback. So Iowa appears to be in good shape. One thing, though, Phil Parker, he is very willing to play young guys, too. At that cornerback spot, he is willing to put guys in there right away. So if it's not happening with Lee, if it's not happening with Hall this year, he'll put those young guys out there and learn on the go as they go at the cornerback spot.
Well, Barrows is an interesting piece because he's big enough to play safety. He's 190, 195 pounds. He's a pretty good tackler, but his grades for coverage while he was at South Dakota weren't great. They were 60.8, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. There aren't any DB coaches that I trust more than Phil in cover 2. Yeah. And if that's what they're going to run, and if he's used to running it, they'll find a little niche somewhere to find him a little bit of playing time, and maybe even, like, again, he's got good size to start. So I think that's important. And any kid out of Florida, I'll take their ability to develop them. Iowa's done it before. So I'm betting that Iowa's DB room is a little better than what some people think. I know that won't shock you, but he's just a great DB coach. There's no way around it. All right. Here's another thing that I think is kind of interesting with the portal. At this point, I have no idea what Iowa's collective is or how much they normally spend. Do you think they spend enough based on NIL to kind of fill needs beyond? I mean, they got a quarterback, so they had to pay some there because I'm sure he had other offers. Did they spend enough to kind of satisfy what they needed?
You know, in fact, I think they went a little bit further than I was anticipating.
Okay.
Yeah, I really do. Now, again, Iowa, a big part of what they're doing with their collective and something that Kirk Ferentz wants to be is the guys that stay, you're going to be rewarded, right? This is not going to be Ole Miss, where it's the new guys coming in. It's a developmental program. And in order to be a developmental program, you have to have, I think, that incentive for guys to stick around and be able to see the fruits of that labor in year 3, year 4, year 5 at times. You have to be able to do that. So they're not going to have the money of some of the other Big Ten programs. I know what I've heard in general, they're top 20-ish in the country. They're not in bad shape. They're not at the elite level by any means, but compared to their Big Ten brethren, once you get past the Michigans and the Ohio States and Penn States and Oregons of the world, they're right there in that next tier that they're doing okay. And I think we can argue about it, but it's just the way that Kirk Ferentz wants to build this program. It's not going to be the backbone. The backbone's still going to be high school recruiting, developmental, and then filling in the gaps. And I think they did a pretty good job of filling in those gaps this season. And you're right, Granowski, some of the numbers that were thrown out there for Granowski and some of the other programs that were looking, I know Miami sniffed around right away when he entered the portal. We know the U's got somebody down there that Granowski certainly, maybe Iowa got a little bit of a discount for keeping a kid close to home.
For those that don't know, Miami's major booster is the guy that owns the South Florida soccer team, professional team. I mean, that kind of money is just different.
Must be nice. Must be nice.
Yeah, that's a different animal all to itself. Transfer, regardless of position that you think, whether or not he's a dominant player is up to you, but that will surprise. And Iowa fans are going to be like, oh, I didn't really think he could do that. Is there anybody you think is going to have a little quicker adjustment and make a play, or is it just like by committee?
So it's a little bit deeper down the list, but we talked about Granowski, another South Dakota State kid in Bryce Hawthorne. So Hawthorne, just going to be a redshirt freshman. He's a defensive tackle. And look at the numbers, didn't have a ton this past season. You looked at this, all right, this is a developmental piece, right? They kind of looked at that defensive tackle room. They feel like they're a little bit light. They'll bring in a guy that's got a little bit of college experience, but is going to have 3 years of eligibility and kind of go from there. What I heard this spring, Bryce Hawthorne's going to help out this year. Not a starter, but he's going to be a guy that's going to be in the rotation at defensive tackle. And you look at Iowa, when they're their best up front, it's when they have depth on the defensive line. I go back to, I think it's almost 15 years ago. Iowa was really good in 2009, won the Orange Bowl against Georgia Tech, had a ton of guys coming back. 2010, they lost a ton of close games. Why? Because they were tired. That defensive line was tired. Their top 4 was as good as anybody in college football. The problem is they didn't have anybody in spots 5 through 8. That has changed, and that is one thing that Phil Parker and the rest of the defensive staff has worked incredibly hard now these last 15 years of every single year having depth. They didn't have that at defensive tackle. Now, I think they do. They bring in Pace, the kid from Central Michigan. He'll probably be a starter alongside Aaron Graves, but Hawthorne, he's going to play this year, and that's one, when he committed, I didn't think was going to be the case. So put Bryce Hawthorne on your list there, kid out of the Minneapolis suburbs.
Win-loss record. Do you think the portal has really kind of changed it? I don't know what FanDuel has them. I'm guessing around 8 wins, somewhere around there is what my projection would be if I was to guess. And well, let's just use Trent. You know better than the people in Vegas because this program you followed your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Did they win more than 8 games this year? If Granowski, I mean, that's the key. Like if you don't win at quarterback, like Iowa fans have groaned about quarterback and rightfully so forever. If he makes the transition, can this be a 9-win team? Maybe even 10 if they pull off a couple of surprises.
So kind of going step by step, before the over-under total came out, it's 7.5 right now at FanDuel. Before it came out in the season and before everything really started, right after we finished up in January, the college football season, I said Iowa, with the schedule that they have and what they had returning, I thought 6.5 would be a fair number, which is well under what they normally are. It's almost every year 7.5 for Iowa football. Granowski, I think, changes that equation. I really do. But that schedule this year, Brian, think of this. And if this would have been a summer conversation or spring conversation we had in the past, a Big Ten team that doesn't have to play Michigan or Ohio State, their schedule is incredibly easy, right? Well, that's the case for Iowa this year. They don't have to play Ohio State or Michigan. That's good. However, they have to play Penn State, Oregon, go to USC, Nebraska on the road, Wisconsin, Indiana, playoff team from a year ago. Oh, by the way, they also play Iowa State, who played in the Big 12 championship game a year ago. Even minus Michigan and Ohio State, this schedule is incredibly difficult. I do think that they get there, and I wouldn't have said that back in January, that they get over the 7.5, but I think that number is spot on. I think this is going to be a team that's 8-4, and if Granowski turns into a star, that's when we start talking about this passing game improvement that we saw in the spring, even without him, that suddenly we're talking about 9-10 games and maybe backdooring your way into a Big Ten championship game.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Like the quarterback play is the one step. Like, Phil's going to scheme it up. Mm-hmm. The O-line's got a couple of guys that can be drafted, possible All-Americans. They got good running backs. So if they can throw the ball, that changes your win total. I mean, you got to find out what he could do against FBS competition week after week. But Granowski's a pretty darn good player. So when we come back, we're going to talk to Trent about the overall Big Ten and what's next for the Hawkeyes. That is next here on Locked On Hawkeyes and Locked On the Portal. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Gametime, you can be a part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Gametime makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer. And their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Here's a good way to use FanDuel in terms of anything that you want to do. It's not very, very difficult. All you have to do is go to the app and check it out. 60% off concerts, comedy, basketball, baseball, football, whatever you want. And you don't have to worry about getting a bad price either. What you see at the front is what you see at checkout. Everything that you need is right there. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You just mentioned, Trent, that the Big Ten, it's deeper now. USC, Washington, and Oregon obviously adds a lot. You guys don't play the Huskies this next season, do you?
Nope.
Okay.
Got them last season, beat them in Kinnick.
Okay. But you've got Oregon. You've got an opportunity to play Penn State, et cetera. Penn State might be the best team in the country this year. They're certainly in the top 10 somewhere, whatever you want to rank them. But do you think that they have the ability to, at bare minimum, knock off one of those teams that says Oregon on its jersey, Penn State, somebody like that, with the players they have now? And again, this is, in my opinion, Granowski's going to have to help them in a different way. So my question to that, I've got a follow-up, but do you think just overall talent, Iowa, if they have a good day, can beat one of those teams?
I do, only because we've seen it so often under Kirk Ferentz. And when you match each of these teams up, heads up, you look at Oregon. Yeah, Iowa's not more talented, and they're not even on the same level. But what Kirk Ferentz can do, we call them the Ferentz specials, right? Those kind of things, and he's been so good at that in the past of having teams play their kind of style. Same thing with Penn State, and you think of the upset that Iowa's had against Penn State throughout the years, and there's been a ton of them throughout the years. So, yeah, Iowa can, but it has to be kind of the right circumstances. And maybe the difference can be this year if we see this offense taking the step forward. We saw it just in terms of points scored a year ago. The running game certainly improved immensely. Now, if that passing game comes along with it, not winning 14-13 when they beat Michigan a few years back, not winning, those games 20-17. Can they win a game 34-30? Can they win one of those types of games to pull an upset? Obviously, the offense has to come along with it. That's been a rarity in the era, but that's, I think, the exciting level that they can do it. And mention Oregon, I can't wait for the Ducks to come waddling in November 8th to Kinnick Stadium. Hopefully that's a night game, because we've seen a lot of seasons die in Kinnick Stadium in November at night.
That should be a pretty cool atmosphere. Iowa fans do a great job. They're very supportive, always have been. It's one of the cooler scenes, I think, in the Big Ten and college football. Oregon won't be afraid of anything, but they lost a lot.
Yeah.
This won't be as good an Oregon team by any account that I've spoken to anybody. They're not a top 5 team, but they're top 12 conservatively. So if they're healthy, you're right, they'll have more talent. But it's just a different animal when you play on the road in the Big Ten late in the year. Your depth is challenged. You'll find out some of those guys we talked about today coming in from the transfer portal for Iowa, they have to be ready for that game. They got to be healthy to beat those kind of teams. Here's my follow-up. Now, we've talked about Granowski.
Yeah.
This is the question that gets a lot of moans from Iowa fans. Who's the receiver or receivers that like are money guys? Can they go against NFL talent? Like in Oregon's going to have some NFL DBs. Can they handle that?
So I will say this. This is as deep of a wide receiver room that Iowa's had in a decade. Now, it's not saying much. I get that. But they have guys. You look through what they did during spring. So Sam Phillips comes in. He is absolutely a speed burner from Chattanooga. Not a big dude by any means. In fact, he's going to look tiny out there. But Iowa hasn't had that kind of speed. Speaking of speed, Caden Weechin, who was the All-American kick returner a year ago, they used him a little bit in gadget plays. They've been getting him a little bit more involved. And then strictly at the wide receiver position, Jarrett Bowie, who we saw pop a couple of times last year. Seth Anderson, the son of Flipper Anderson. He is finally healthy after being injured for 2 straight years in Iowa City. He looked really good on Saturday. They got guys that at minimum are going to be competent. And I think there's even more upside with a lot of these guys. Just Iowa hasn't had that. They haven't had guys that you feel like you can count on. But secondly, the kind of depth to push each other where, in the past, Terrence Smith, who's coming in June, a true freshman, they're like, oh, he's got to play, right? He's got to play because they don't have any other wide receivers. That's actually not the case for once. Out of this group, who's going to pop? That's what I don't know, but I'm excited about the depth of wide receiver.
That's the thing. Like when you go against one of these teams that they're going to drop 20-some points, even against Iowa's defense, they're going to score in the mid-20s at least because they just got so many explosive players. Even Georgia has transitioned. I mean, Kirby's about as crusty as Kirk. I mean, he doesn't like it. But you have to score. Teams are going to throw the ball on you. That's the last step for Iowa. And they got a real quarterback. I mean, he's going to play in this thing they call the National Football League. But if he doesn't have a number 1 or at least a good number 2, it still leaves him really limited because you roll coverage to their main guy, and then they're just going to man up. So I'm curious to see if Iowa can come up with that. I think they're going to win 8, if not 9 games, because I really like the quarterback.
Yeah.
But like you, I need to see, okay, which one of these receivers is going to be that main guy? That's the biggest question I still have for Iowa. Is there anything else in regards to Iowa you need to see a position like a player step up to be the dude? Or is it just, kind of a team ball deal, which Iowa usually is?
The final guy that I'd throw your name is one that you certainly know very well, Xavier Wampa. And Xavier was wanted by everybody in the country. So he finally this season moves over to free safety. And from all the reports, and he didn't play in the final spring open practice, but from all the reports, this is the spot for him. This is where he's going to be able to play his best, be that center fielder. Brian, I've told you before, I call a lot of high school football, called a ton of his games. I have never seen a kid even close to the closing ability that he had at the high school level. It was just otherworldly. And I think moving over to free safety, fits his skill set a whole lot more. And that's another one where, though he's played a ton, he's also been benched a couple of times. You don't see many 5-stars that get benched, but that was the case with Xavier Wampa, and he stuck around for his final season. I think you're going to see that growth, and I think you're going to see a really nice senior season at free safety now for Xavier Wampa.
Trent, tell everybody where they can find your work, my friend.
You can hear me each and every day on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. We are rolling through spring football. We're recapping everything there. Portal's open for basketball as well, so we're talking plenty about that. The Iowa baseball team in front of all those newbies from the Pac-12, so we got a lot going there each and every day with Locked On Hawkeyes, and also I host a radio show in Central Iowa and across the state of Iowa on the Iowa Sports Radio Network from noon to 2 each weekday. So busy, always talking a lot of Hawkeyes.
Absolutely. Sounds good, my friend. You can find the Portal Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Podbean, anywhere you get your pods. Check us out, like and subscribe, and give us a 5-star review. We'll see you again soon on the Portal Podcast.